What is up, everybody? Welcome back to my continued trek through the Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation novel series. We are on Volume 5 now, the one that a lot of people were super excited about me getting into. Thankfully, got some time put in my schedule to read into it, and I am already absolutely blown away by how much stuff was completely skipped in the anime, which, unfortunately, again, I understand the idea that not everything can be covered, a lot of inner dialogue and stuff, but we're talking some really good insights into the mindset of Paul, which, again, a bunch of stills and some music playing does not cover the mental state of Paul, and I ate every bit of it up. It's kind of similar to my experience with the first volume and seeing more insight into Zenith that we never got in the anime. It gives a different picture as to how these parents think about their situation and the struggles they're going through. First of all, I want to give a pre-warning to everybody. Of course, this is from a perspective of somebody that watched the first season of Mushoku Tensei Jobless Reincarnation anime, and I'm going into the novel series. So please, as always, and it seems like we're getting more and more of it lately than ever, please keep spoilers out of the comment section, not only for myself, but for other people. Let us enjoy going through the story as it progresses and get the information that we want when it actually presents it. But yes, going into chapter 1, we have 18 months have passed since the displacement incident. We're now following Rudeus once again as they're heading towards the holy country of Millis. And yes, it's a spectacular view. He's completely blown away by it. Everything kind of meets the expectations of what Geese said about it. There's a lot of greens, blues, huge massive lake surrounding this huge massive castle. They kind of make some comments here and there about how, isn't that a bad thing that they're on this lake because wouldn't rain and stuff mess it up? But it seems like, according to Geese, they have these 7 magic towers that surround it that is almost a magical barrier. Yes, they had problems in the past with weather, but it seems like these magical barriers themselves help them keep the control of the weather itself. It also additionally serves as a magical barrier for defenses. So yes, Rudeus makes some passing comment like, oh, okay, so if we want to attack this town, we gotta take down those towers first. And Geeks is like, don't say anything like that. If the Holy Knights hear you say anything like that, you're going to go straight to jail. Additionally, it seems like it also protects the city from natural disasters and disease epidemics, so very interesting. Moving on, we get a little bit of layout of the city itself. Rudeus is mentioning the idea that this is kind of something, straight out of a fantasy. Like, this is a perfectly laid out city. You have all these districts and you have these perfectly laid out grids of streets and everything. But additionally, pointing out the fact that they have essentially 4 different sections to the city. You have the residential area to north, you have the commercial district to the east, you have the Adventurers Guild area in the south, and additionally the Divine District, which is in the west. And as the names would imply, yes, you have the residents in the northern area, which is mostly people that live in the area, additionally knights and stuff. Commercials, obviously going to be more of your shops and your stores and everything. The adventures area is pretty much led by the Adventure Guild, and that's where all the adventurers come in. You have a lot of inns and shops for the adventurers there. And additionally, of course, to the Divine District, you have pretty much all the church and all the members of the church are in that area, which leads them to have to enter into the city from the side that's the adventure side. Geese mentions that if you were to enter any other district, they're going to look at you very suspiciously. They're going to inspect you more. Outsiders aren't really welcome in those areas. Entering the adventure side, immediately he sees how chaotic it is. You have lots of people there, people, chucking their wares. You have a lot of the more cheaper inns are right at the entrance, similar to most other places. He found it kind of cool that when they went to the stables to put their horses up, they immediately offer to take their goods to the inn of their choice. So it's kind of allowing them to avoid a lot of that chaos. This is, of course, the point in which Geese departs from the group. Yes, not outside of the city, but inside the city. And Rudeus is kind of a little bit upset by this. He doesn't see Geese as a bad guy. Like, this is somebody that's kind of helped him out. Getting, loyal members of your party is a little bit difficult in this world. And he kind of trusts Geese. But additionally, of course, he's upset that he will no longer be able to eat really well. Eris, of course, makes one more time to claim that he should teach her how to cook next time they meet, but of course he says no once again. Gives his passing comments to Ruijerd, telling him to take care of himself as well before he starts departing. But just before he goes too far away, he ends up telling Rudeus, hey, make sure to stop by the Adventure Guild before, do anything else. Which, yes, we know why he's doing that. Geese knows why he needs to go to the Adventure Guild. They even look around for a little bit for an inn. They end up finding one that's the Dawn's Light Inn, which is kind of hidden away. It has very little light during the day, but he finds that's perfectly fine for him. It's a little bit more upscale than their typical inns that they stay at, so obviously Eris has to make some sort of comment about how they could have found a cheaper in because Rudeus keeps telling her and Ruijerd that they need to keep their money, you know, safe and not spend too much of it. So it seems to have rubbed off on Eris a little bit. They do their usual cleaning of the inn itself like they typically do. It's kind of routine for them at this point before they go down, have dinner, and then head back up to their room to have a dead end meeting. At this point, Rudeus is very happy with their accomplishments. They've made a lot of ground. They've made it all the way to Millis. Now, granted, he does acknowledge that they have a long trek ahead of them, easily another year of travel, despite the fact that, you know, they've gotten through all the areas that are rough terrain. All the roads on this side where the humanoids are at are very well kept, but it's still a long distance they have to travel. He estimates it about 1/4 of the circumference of the planet itself, that distance they still need to make. Because of this, Rudeus has decided, you know, it'd be best if we stayed here for at least a month. This will allow them to do jobs in around the town, gather some funds that will allow them to make the entire journey better. Rather than stopping at villages on the way home, they can make a bunch of money here now, and that will kind of secure them the funds they need to make it all the way. And even though Eris is kind of against this, Rudeus is pointing out the fact that we still don't even know how much it's going to cost to get a Superb over to the central continent. We still have one more boat to go, which Eris immediately is upset about. Also, because of this route that he's planning on taking, he does acknowledge this to Ruijerd, you know, look, we're not going to be able to do a lot of the stuff that we normally do to help benefit the Superbs. We're going to have to put that on the wayside, which Ruijerd isn't against, but at the same time, Rudeus himself kind of mentions at this point, you know, I'd be perfectly fine with staying here for another 6 months. It would be a great amount of time to really get the word out there that Superbs are good, but unfortunately, he feels like they've been taking too long at this point. Like, it's been a year and a half. He doesn't want to waste any more time. He wants to get them home at this point. Everybody's probably worried sick about them, which yes reminds him that, you know, I need to make my letter. Like, things keep distracting me. I need to write my letter to Sylphie and my family, and yes, even to Eris's family as well. He mentions it to Eris, and Eris is like, you take care of it. Like, okay, I'll handle telling your parents that you're okay. In order to write this letter, he decides that they're going to take the day off. Like, tomorrow, we're going to take the day off. He mentions this idea that they've had days off before. Typically, he knows that Eris doesn't need days off. The girl is just full of energy. And yes, he knows that Ruijerd is this hardened warrior, and he doesn't need any rest either. Typically, whenever he asks for days off, it's for himself. And he mentions specifically that, you know, look, I'm more physically fit than I was in my previous life. Yes, I was a slob back then. So I'm a lot more physical now. I'm able to move around a lot more. What kind of weighs Rudeus down, he's mentioning at this point, is it's more of a mental thing. Yes, he's not killing people, but just killing monsters, living things, is mentally draining upon himself. Like, it stresses him out, which I think, again, it's nothing that we really ever covered in the anime itself. It's never mentioned this idea that Rudeus himself is getting mentally exhausted. By the way, he does mention the idea that the reason he needs the day off is because he needs to write these letters. Like, he's been putting it off long enough. It's time to make these letters, send them out, let everybody know that we're okay. And so he asks Eris, what do you plan on doing? She's like, I'm gonna go goblin slaying. He's like, oh yeah, I've heard that there's a thing around here that, you know, goblins gather together and they cause a lot of problems. But aren't those the goblins in those stores? Of course, immediately goes to his old world and how they used to always depict goblins taking women and breeding with them. So he's immediately upset about this. Like, you really shouldn't do that. You should take Ruijerd with you. And I was like, no, I'm perfectly fine. And Ruijerd even agrees. No, she's fine. And we just kind of acknowledge that, yes, goblins are technically E-rank monsters, so it's not as if they're difficult. Somebody like Eris can easily handle them. He's just still kind of concerned. So he's like, okay, well, that's fine. He's not going to argue with her anymore, but at least if things get bad, just grab one of their hands and scream, Lester, help. It was interesting to get a little more insight into goblins in this world itself. He seems to claim that they are intelligent creatures. They're able to speak to each other. But he also presumes that they possibly are of the demon race, like a type of the demon race itself. But because they live like animals, they live amongst the monsters of the world, they're kind of seen as something to be disposed of. So if they gather a lot of them, they'll have a lot of missions to go out and dispose of them. Which is interesting to sort of kind of be in that barrier just before being a demon. Demon race obviously being something that people wouldn't be going out and slaughtering endlessly, but in that realm of being more in the realm of monsters. Now here was an interesting thing. Specifically, because Ruijerd said, you know, I'm not going to do it. Eris is fine. I got my own things to do. I'm going to go meet an acquaintance. And he's like, wait, an acquaintance? Wait, Ruijerd has an acquaintance? Who's this acquaintance? He's like, oh, it's a warrior. He's like, well, I'm not going to press Ruijerd anymore, but again, not in the anime. In the anime, specifically, Eris says that she's going to goblin slay, and then Rudeus is like, you know, hey, Ruijerd, keep an eye on her. Like, he keeps winking at him to get him to go watch her. Never mentioned anything about going to meet somebody, which I think is a huge thing. It's one of those things where it's not a big deal that it's not in the anime, but it's sort of important to know that Ruijerd knows somebody. Like, this is somebody that knows really nobody. And to think that Ruijerd knows somebody, yes, tell me more. I think that's kind of important. So I don't know, maybe later on in another chapter, maybe we'll get a Ruijerd perspective for this. I know that we apparently will get a Goblin Slaying chapter, which is Eris going on her own, which was eventually made into an OVA, but we'll see. Jumping the next day, we have the day off. Rudeus is exploring around the market. He's checking different things in the market itself. He knows specifically that they have a lot of eggs here. They're surprisingly cheap. And this gets into thinking about, omelet rice and stuff like that, and that really strong desire he has for soy sauce and everything. Gets talking about how, yes, they have eggs on the demon continent, but they're typically laid by monsters, and people don't eat them. They buy the eggs themselves, they let them hatch, and they let them impression upon themselves. Or, of course, specifically with chicken eggs and stuff. Poultry in these other continents, it's obviously for food. He does acknowledge that there is rice in this world, but it doesn't seem like with the Millis that they sell it. He says that rice is a staple in the north and eastern regions of the central continent, and Roxy had mentioned that at the Ch1 Kingdom, they use rice as a base for a lot of things, like fried rice, and they put a lot of vegetables and meats in it. But specifically soy sauce, he says he hasn't seen anything about it. He has seen something that looks like a soybean within some sort of written material, but he doesn't know if anybody has actually gone through the process of fermenting it and everything. He kind of makes the proclamation that one day I will put everything together and make it myself. I will make my dream come true. It's always Japan. These isekais, they're always obsessed with this. At this point, he's kind of starting to contemplate what he plans on actually writing about in his letters to his family. He's thinking about, should I start from the beginning about my training of Eris, or should I jump immediately? No, the displacement incident, that's probably the important thing for us to talk about, or for me to tell him about. They're probably worried about us. But at this point, he's also acknowledging the idea that he's curious if even he can send a letter to Saros. He acknowledges that the light itself was coming from the Citadel of Roa. So there's a good chance that, Saros might be gone as well. But additionally, wondering, of course, what happened to Ghislaine. At this point, he ends up seeing a bunch of guys running down this alleyway towards him, and they yell for him to move. You get this little inner thought process of him going, I move to the side, but it's not like I'm afraid of them or anything, but you just never know who you might bump into. It could be some random super fury warrior that you run into that's going to just slice you up. I mean, let's be honest. He ran into a small starving girl in an alleyway in the Demon Continent who turned out to be the Demon Empress herself. So it's not as if whoever you bump into, you should just jump into a fight with. But yes, this isn't just some random people running through the alleyway. He obviously notices that one of them, or two of them, is carrying a bag that has a hand hanging out of it. So he assumes more kidnappers, which is obviously a very common thing in this world. He specifically mentions the idea that there's not many people that will sell people that are kidnapped, obviously for forced work. But he acknowledged that Asura and Millis love these workers. They love buying people. And since the supply can never really meet the demand, it's very profitable. If you can find somebody, if you can sell somebody to one of these groups, you can make a lot of money. He of course debates, should I get involved? Obviously I'm going to get involved. It's the dead end way. The dead end, you cannot let any child be in peril. So he follows them all the way to this warehouse. Now this is where we get into some very interesting additions in the light novel that was not adapted into the anime. This beginning part's kind of similar. He goes and he uses this earth magic to push himself into the warehouse. He hides inside of this box. It's very comfy. He's noting that they have this, the kidnapped person here and a couple people around them, about 4 guys around them. And he's contemplating, should I just knock them out now before they get reinforcements and then take the person out? Or should I just wait until they leave and then snatch them and run away, when they're not looking? But unfortunately, because Rudeus will be Rudeus, he finally realizes the soft, cushion that he's laying on. He grabs something and he picks it up and it's Pantsu. So he yells something and everybody knows that he's there. So he decides to mask himself for the Pantsu and claim that he's dead end, he's Ruijerd dead end, and they're all villains, which immediately he's seen as a pervert. Now this is interesting because as everybody's coming at him, he's knocking them out with magic, using his little stone cannon, just like he did with the guy that was, harassing Kishirika. And over some time, of course, you have the entrance of the Bikini Warrior and the Mage. And I love this whole segment because the way that they wrote this was fantastic, because he's constantly thinking about other things. Okay, so you have this mage back here. She's doing an incantation. What incantation is she doing? I need to figure out. Oh, yeah, by the way, there's these things in front of my face. They're juggling around and they're possibly slipping out. Like every time he starts to think of something else, he gets cut off mid-sentence and starts talking about how these things are just this Bikini Warriors things are just kind of shaking around and possibly falling out. It was absolutely hilarious. He's even contemplating the entire time he's dodging this girl's attacks. I mean, is she doing this on purpose? It's like, is this her style? I mean, bikini, they mentioned later on that bikini armor itself isn't a rare thing in this world, but man, this is like super skimpy. And yeah, she's stacked and she's got a nice plump in. It's just, he cannot stop thinking about what's flying towards him. But he's doing pretty good. He's holding them off. He's using like Stonewall to block all the attacks from the mage, and he's dodging the other girl and punching her and knocking her away. And eventually he's like, you know, I gotta figure out something. And so he recalls the story of the North Wind and the Sun, which apparently is a story about the Sun and North Wind having a competition on who can get the clothes off of this adventurer first. And the North Wind keeps pulling wind at him, trying to blow the clothes off, but it never works. So the Sun, in response, decides to make it so hot that the adventurer takes off their clothes, you know, of their own will. So using this logic, he decides that he's going to make it really hot in there. No, that was not what he wanted to do. He like catches himself like, no, wait, I don't want her to take off more. That'd be more distracting. No, he's going to use ice magic to really lower the temperature in there and force her to have to put on more clothing. So he, of course, freezes the ground around them. It drops the temperature a lot. He blows her away with a very breezy gust. And at that point, she decides to ask somebody for a coat to put on. And unfortunately, that's not it, because that's the point in which this captain they keep calling for finally arrives. And he really quickly realized this guy seems very familiar. Can't quite place it. He says, yes, he kind of sounds like Paul, but a Paul that's like hasn't slept for months and has gone on some crazy diet. Yes, it pretty much implies that. For us, we know, yes, he hasn't slept for months. Yes, that's sounds about right. Now, this is interesting because in the anime, it was very simple. Like, Paul comes in, attacks Rudeus, and at some point, Rudeus is jumping around, and eventually his pawns get cut, and Paul recognizes him. But I like the novel a lot more because it put a little more emphasis and a little more credit to Rudeus himself. He's fought Paul before, and he got his butt kicked by Paul. And yes, Rudeus does acknowledge here that this guy looks like he's stammering a little bit. He's obviously, you know, drank too many drinks, but he's still putting Paul at a huge disadvantage here. He's using his foresight to dodge a lot of attacks. He's using Shockwave to knock him away. And at some point, Paul, as he's trying to attack Rudeus, he eventually goes, he's fighting just like that kid. And he calls for the two to help him, Vera and Shira. Which, when I noticed that, I'm like, whoa, wait. Paul's calling for reinforcements to fight Rudeus? That's huge. So in response to this, Rudeus puts Paul in a lot of this mud to kind of stop his movement. And then he uses a stone cannon attack to knock out both of them. And at this point, Paul's getting like super mad. Like he puts the blade in his mouth, he sheathes his other sword, and he uses his foresight and sees that Paul's gonna come at him on all fours. Like, this guy is a beast. And as Paul's going crazy at him and fighting at him, eventually Rudeus realizes, you know, look, this guy is like super mad. He's trying to kill me. If I don't do something now, I'm not gonna leave this place alive. He doesn't want to kill anybody. Like, Rudeus does not want to take any lives, and so he's really forcing himself to avoid that. But he's realizing at this point, you know, it's do or die at this point. I didn't really kind of get that sense in the anime itself that Rudeus right here was about to make the decision to have to kill Paul. Of course, we knew that he was just wanting to knock everybody out and take the kid away. He doesn't want to take any lives, but this point right here, he's really contemplating that. Oh, I forgot, it was kind of cool to find out in this point, Rudeus used his Beef Folk shout. Like, he actually used it. I was mentioning when we were talking in the Doldia village, that at some point he actually sat down with the chief and was learning the Beast Folk, their shout. The one that was used upon him by Gaius. But right here, he actually used it on Paul. He used a shout to, and it was only like a very instantaneous hold. Like, again, he says it doesn't have the same effects as if a Beast Folk would use it, because they have like a special vocal cords. But at least here it's showing that he is able to use it. Even if it is only instantaneously, it's enough time for somebody like Rudeus to get off an instant incantation. Yes, if he was having to do long incantations, this wouldn't be useful to him. He would have to have something like a Beast Folks where it would hold somebody still for a long time to use a cast. But since he can instantly cast stuff, an instant shock just to stop him is really beneficial. So it's interesting, and it was really cool to see that. I noted it back here, and he's actually using it. And yes, something that was never in the anime. Something that was never in the, if it's crucial to a fight at some point in the anime, they're gonna have to explain it. But yes, eventually he realizes that his Ponsu falls off. He's just about that point where he's having to decide that he's gonna do something, and then Paul calls out to him, Rudy, and then he realizes, oh yeah, he's gone through a transformation. This is Paul. This is my father. His face is gaunt. He's got bags under his eyes. He's got stubble on his cheeks. His hair is unkempt, and he reeks of booze. He's realizing that like the difference between the last time that he's seen him and this time is just drastically different. And that's pretty much covers that fight, and that goes into Chapter 2. Chapter 2 was absolutely amazing. I could not have asked for something better. And it echoes from a lot of people what they stated during the anime adaptation. The point in which we had Rudeus was trying to explain to Paul what had happened up to this point, and Paul blew up on him. And we had this fun debate about, who was right. Who was right in this argument, Rudeus or Paul? Was it okay for Paul to be angry at Rudeus? Was it okay for Rudeus to do what he did? Reading chapter 2, I suddenly go, yeah, I don't blame Paul no more. I don't blame Paul at all. There is so much emotion packed in this segment of chapter that really gives you a sense of Paul from the point of normality to despair, to even more despair, to some hope, and to completely falling under. And it gives so much weight to all the frustration that Paul had when he finally found Rudeus. So, the true story of Paul's journey to Millis continent opens up. He's in a grassy field. He's still holding on to Norn, though he doesn't realize that at that point. He's looking around, thinking that he's in some sort of dream. He's realizing really quickly he's near a village that he once stayed at, so he knows where he's at, but he thinks he's in some sort of dream, and he's recalling all these memories about being out there at this village. This is where he pretty much trained the water god style. Really hated the place. really hated the place. And this is, of course, the village in which where Lilia actually was born. And he was training at this place, and he hated everybody that he was alongside. All of his senpais really were trying to push him down because they wanted to establish dominance over him because they knew that he was doing really well. He even mentioned at some point when he reached the intermediate point, they were still in beginner point. He even hated his master. His master was only advanced style. After all this time of training, he spouted about guts and determination, and he kind of mentioned the idea that, look what that got you. You're still advanced rank. He really looked down upon everybody that was there. And at some point, he got sick of it. Like, everybody's looking down at me. I left my father because of that. Though, with his father at least, he acknowledged that his father had power. He had a reason for looking down upon him. But these people, there was no reason they'd be looking down upon him. So he decides that one day he's just going to ruin it all and leave. And yes, the way that he does that, the way to really throw dirt in their face before he left, was he forced himself upon Lilia. And this is... I freaking hate Paul. I so hate Paul. He mentioned specifically, hey, he was always looking at Lilia. Like, he planned on getting with her at some point. So he decides, yes, in order to really stick it to these people, he was going to basically deflower this thing they all treasured. So he forced himself upon Lilia and then immediately left. Even knows this idea that they were all looking for him, trying to find him. They were super angry at him. And the entire time he was leaving, he was just sneering. And to his credit, yes, he acknowledges, man, I was a stupid kid. Like, I forced myself upon Lilia. I took it out on her. He acknowledges that it's not his finest hour. Like, to do that to Lilia, just to spite them, was terrible for him to do. Which, yes, we already knew that he did that. Like, he did force him. They already acknowledged that he forced himself upon Lilia. It's one of those things where it compounds even worse in the idea that this is something he did in order to get to somebody else. Like, she was a casualty of his frustrations with these people. While he's remembering all this stuff, he snaps back to it, realizing that Norn is in his arms. She's grabbing it, tugging at him, and saying, Daddy, what's going on? And it seems kind of foreign to him. Like, he's got Norn in his arms, and he acknowledges the idea that he never really hugs Norn. He said that he was going for this stern, dignified father thing. So he kept his physical expressions of affections to a minimum. Recounting on why he made this decision, he remembers the moments before he transported there. He was in the house chatting with Zenith. She was mentioning the idea that, girls at a certain age will not let their fathers touch them anymore, so you might want to get in your squeezes while you can. And he's mentioning the idea that, like, I'm going for paternal dignity this time. Norn doesn't really seem like Rudeus, so I'm hoping I can convince her that I'm the greatest man in the world. To which Zenith replies that, wasn't that the route that your father was taking and you hated him? And he's like, okay, fine then, let me at her. Let me get my hug in. At the same time, he's remembering that Lilia was there with Aisha. He mentioned that Lilia quickly acknowledges that Aisha has a gift, and she's trying to nurture her talents and giving her a lot of lessons. And Paul tried to push back against Lilia, saying, look, let her enjoy her life. Let her enjoy being a kid. But then when Lilia pushed back, he quickly submitted, like, okay, fine, then do whatever you're going to do. Because Aisha is, like, from an early age was walking, and she absorbs, like, everything that she's taught like a sponge. It made him really fear that there was something wrong with Norn. Norn, on the other hand, born at the same time, isn't really advancing as well as Aisha. But Lilia kind of calms his fears, mentioning the idea that, Aisha's nowhere near compared to Rudeus. Rudeus was crazy. Norn's normal. But even still then, Paul is kind of fearful for Norn because she's kind of living in the shadow of not just Rudeus now, but also Aisha. He feels bad for her. Again, kind of acknowledging the idea that he feels like something might be wrong with Norn. And it was at that point that the flash came and they were all transported. Yes, I want to point out right here, Sylphie wasn't there. At least they didn't acknowledge that Sylphie was at the house. Again, in the anime, Sylphie just came in the door, and that's when the flash happened and they were transported. At this point, Paul starts to really run through his head. What happened? What was this light? What happened to everybody? He knows that Lilia and Zenith are nowhere to be found. But Norn is with him. So the possibility that came to his mind was a teleportation trap. In his many days going through labyrinths, he knew about teleportation traps. These were these traps that when they're set off, it'll transport somebody. But not only that, but anybody that person's touching. He recalls this one time where he got one of these traps and he immediately instinctively grabbed Elenase and they were both transported together. Now, granted, typically this is death. Like, these teleportation traps will typically be lethal. And so yes, Elenase was super mad at him for grabbing her. Like, you could have killed me too. But he blames it all on a certain monkey-faced guy, Geese, for not having found that trap before they set it off. But again, this is his mindset that he's going into. This has to be some sort of teleportation magic or a trap itself. But he does acknowledge that there's the ability to use teleportation magic itself is impossible. There's no incantation for it. The only way that you can do it is using teleportation items or teleportation circles. But he says that teleportation items themselves are banned worldwide. And additionally, for the circles themselves, they're strictly forbidden. So he's thinking like, okay, yes, I have a lot of enemies, so I can see somebody doing that to our home and attacking me, but why send me out in the middle of nowhere? It doesn't make any sense to go through that length and use forbidden magic just to get at me. But then he's starting to remember, he was just thinking about the fact that these people, he deflowered Lilia and then ditched them. It could be them. Maybe they teleported me over here so that by the time I got back home, I'd find a bunch of thugs that were, having their way with Zenith and Lilia, just to get back at me. Now, fearing the worst, he decides to make his travels back home. So he immediately goes to the nearby village, he goes into the adventure guild itself, kind of has to do a lot of work to get himself back up to snuff. He does note the fact that he always keeps his sword with him no matter where he goes. Inside that hilt, he keeps coin. Additionally, he keeps his adventure card there, which he has to get recharged because the mana is completely gone. At the time they're recharging it, the guild lady freaks out, because at the same time he's taking upon himself this quest, this E-rank emergency quest, and she realizes this is an S rank. Why would he be doing that? So he gets some non-vague answers to kind of appease her before kind of leaving. But the reason why he's taking this emergency quest is because he wants to get a free horse. One of the benefits to being an S rank is for doing delivery quests like this, they'll actually give you a horse to use. And he quickly realized this is a really fancy horse, so this must be a very important emergency delivery. But he realizes that, I'm going the opposite direction. I'm not actually doing this quest. I'm going home, and so this could possibly cost me my adventure license. And it is important to note that the reason why he's able to take this E rank is because it's an emergency job, which allows S ranks to take it. So after exchanging some coins, he gets on the horse, gets Norn on it, and starts traveling to the Fatella region. And it takes him about 2 months to get there because Norn falls ill. She's not used to riding horseback, so he has to spend a lot of time to nurse her back to health. And that's, of course, when despair sets upon Paul. Not when he reached the Buena village. No, he's not even there yet. He's already realized that the Fatella region itself has completely vanished. Like, this is a larger scale issue than just what he thought of in his own home. He knows that the Citadel of Roa is gone as well, so he's obviously acknowledging that something could have happened to Rudeus. And yes, in anguish, acknowledging all that's happening, he's already echoing in his mind this teleportation trap. Something he's heard a lot of tragedies and stuff in his days in the labyrinths. People that were separated from their party members just to come find out they're all dead. But in this anguish, once again, Norn snaps him out of it. Like, Norn is like his, throughout this whole segment, Norn is like his rock. Whenever he gets further and further in despair, she's the only one pulling him back out of it. Oh, that's right. I'm a father. This is my daughter. I have to do what I need to do. He had to stay confident. He had to prove to her that everything was going to be okay. That's what he has to do as a father. At this point, he's kind of running through these scenarios. Okay, Zenith is an adventurer. She's going to be fine by herself. Lilia, yes, she's less nimble as she used to be before she was poisoned, but she still knows how to use a sword. Aisha's the only question mark for him. He's running it through his head. Was she touching Aisha? Did she have contact with Aisha when this happened? Are they together? He wants to believe that they were touching. This is where we get a real sense about how pretty much the entire search party and rescue party stuff origined. Because at this point, we learn that Philip and Cyrus are missing. Philip's older brother has pretty much taken over as active lord. And yes, to what we learned before, he's being blamed for this whole situation, but at the same time, he's not doing anything to help the people because he's so focused on protecting himself. Something that Paul absolutely despise learning. This is why he hates the nobles. During Paul's investigations, he eventually runs into Alphonse, and Alphonse, being like still loyal to the Boreas Grey Rat family, wants to do everything he can to help the people. So he wants to set up a refugee camp. And this is all paid by his own pocket. And he wants specifically Paul to help him out. Why him? Apparently Philip said some kind words about Paul. He says that Paul is a man that shows his real worth in a crisis. Though he also mentioned the idea that most crises are caused by his short-sightedness. He's like, I don't need to be insulted right now. But Alphonse wants Paul's help, even though he's hesitant, because he knows he's Rudeus's father. Kind of acknowledging the idea that Rudeus really impressioned himself upon this guy. And through Alphonse's connections, they kind of get everything together to put together the refugee camp in just like a short few weeks, using Paul's help, gathering people. And with everything kind of set up, this is the point in which we have the establishment of the Fatoa Search and Rescue Squad. This is something that Paul puts together by gathering a lot of the refugees, anybody that's willing to help, to go out and find any of the displaced people. Obviously acknowledges the idea that his primary objective is that he wants to find his family, but he's putting together this system because this is the best way to go about that. At this point, the power struggle that's happening in the capital resolved itself because Alphonse is able to get some sort of recovery benefit funds from the government itself. And it's at this point that Paul leaves behind this message to Rudeus at the camp before he heads off with his squad to the holy country of Millis, which specifically seems to be because it is the headquarters for the Adventure Guild. Being that Asura and Millis are both the largest countries in the entire world, he feels like this is the best approach that he can find to have the most information available to him to find people. Now at Millis, we find out that a large number of the people that were teleported during the displacement ended up on this continent. During the first 6 months, they were extremely productive. Now here's the problem, because all of these displaced people end up captured and then sold off as for servitude. And the problem that Paul is facing is that liberating these people is against the law by Millis. But he knows that the thought of Zenith or Lilia being sold off is enough fury that he's willing to break any law. It was his policy at this point that if anybody was found, any of the villagers, any of the displaced, they would do everything they can to release them. Now he does need power. You can't just walk in there and start doing all this stuff. What Paul ends up doing is going to Zenith's family. Because yes, Zenith's family is from Millis. They are a noble family, they have a lot of power there, and they're known for producing a lot of really famous knights, amongst other things. With Zenith's family's help, he's able to lay the groundwork to freeing these people. Once they find people, once they free them, anybody that's able, they'll give them the funds they need in order to make the travel back home. But if there's elderly or children, they kind of find a place that they can stay at for the time being. And yes, the freeing aspect is the difficult part. What they kind of lay into effect is they have like a 3-step process. Initially, if they find somebody that is being forced servitude, Paul will go to them and try to offer money to buy them. If they don't accept that, if they're not willing to accept that payment, that's when he gets Zenith's family involved. And they will go over there and they will try to put pressure on them as a noble family within this area. But unfortunately, that doesn't always work. And that leads into the last choice they have, which is when they actually have to snatch them up and free them. And this, of course, does not look good upon the nobles of Millis. These are their things that they bought. Somebody's going around and snatching them up. They don't like this. So a lot of them will send their own special forces just to take them out. And they've lost a lot of people due to that. But it doesn't seem like that really, pushes anybody off. Like his squad is so set on doing this. Like they have the moral high ground. This is something that's good. They are doing just things here. So nobody really questions him. But unfortunately, after all these successes, Paul's really kind of slowly falling into despair. Despite all his connections, the fact that he's a Grey Rat family, despite his connections with the Zenith family, despite being a former popular adventurer, he's not finding any information about the whereabouts of Zenith or Lilia. Shoot, he's even puzzled by the fact that his boy, Rudeus, who stands out like a sore thumb, he's not even finding information on him either. A year's passed, and he's really, really falling further and further into despair. He's running out of reports on Fatoans in the area. He's gained a lot of hatred from the nobles. They're hunting them down in the middle of the streets. Any of the squad members are found in the streets. They're just being either injured or killed. And it's gained him a lot of hatred from his own squad. They're blaming him at this point, which he's like, they're probably right, but I've laid this path down and I've chosen this path. And we've seen a lot of success by this. But still, the ratio of Fatoans that are found dead or alive is starting to shift, and it's getting worse and worse. He's already mentioned that the Itos are dead, which for those that don't remember, that's Samal's parents. You remember the bully that was bullying Sylphie, and the mother would come to Paul's house just to see him? That's the Itos. So they're dead, which yes, we technically know that the one that Rudeus was coming here to rescue from Paul and his team was Samal. He said that Chloe's dead. I don't know who that is. It says specifically Laws is dead, which Laws would be Sylphie's father. He says Bonnie, Lane, Marion, and Monty. I don't know any of those ones. I'm sure that one of those is probably Sylphie's mother. I don't know. If you know, don't tell me. I don't remember it mentioned in the first volume. I tried to look for it, but I couldn't find it. But yeah, specifically Laws being her father, we already know he's dead. But yes, things are getting worse. And as more people they find dead, the more his squad is getting more and more angered. Some of them would break down in tears and blame him why they didn't come to that village or that city fast enough in order to save them. But he mentioned that everything he does is calculated. Like he doesn't want to just rush to certain locations. He has to plan things out to prevent them from being stranded. And they've saved several thousand refugees this way. And he kind of wishes at this point that he can reconnect with the Black Wolf Fangs. He says that he was a stupid kid at the time. They broke up the party with a sour note. They probably hate his guts, but he says he doesn't blame them. Like it was his fault. At this point, 1.5 years has passed since the displacement incident. Pretty much alcohol's the only thing that's keeping him going at this point. Every time he's not under the influence, he's just constantly thinking about what he could have done, what has happened to his family, are they dead, were they crying for pain, waiting for him to come save them somewhere in the world, doing a lot of woulda, shoulda, should I gone to this continent, why am I wasting my time with all these people, I've saved so many people, but I haven't even touched my family, I shouldn't have stayed here, I should have gone to another continent by myself, I could have gone to the Demon Continent, I could have gone to the Bagaret Continent. He's just doing all these woulda, shouldas and really putting a lot of blame upon himself for the death of his family. He made the wrong choices. At this point, everything's kind of wrapping up. While still in his bed of despair, he's pretty much everybody's kind of avoiding him at this point because all he's doing is drinking all the time. He's not even getting involved with a lot of the movements of the squad itself. But this is the wrap up of the situation. Like we're not even 2 years in, and this is the point in which they're kind of cutting funding. There's no point in searching anymore. They're taking all the remaining refugees that are in the city, the elderly and the children, the sick, and they're going to basically do a big escort back to the homeland. They're kind of tired of being there. Paul honestly understands the reason why they're cutting the funding. There's no point in combing for people at this point, but he's still upset that even after all this, he hasn't found his family. Like the only one that's at his side anymore is Norn. Norn is like his only light in life right now. And this little cute moment where Norn comes in as he's kind of doing his usual drunk stupor, and she kind of snaps him out of it once again and says that, look, I found something really great happened outside. And he's like, what is that? And she's like, I fell in the street and this really nice, big, tall, bald guy helped me up. And then he gave me this apple. And he's like, oh, you shouldn't call people bald because a lot of guys are really sensitive about their hair. So I was like, that's totally Ruijerd. And at the same time, yes, he is sensitive about his hair, or at least other people are sensitive about his hair. So I got a huge kick out of that very brief cameo of Ruijerd in this story. And that kind of wraps it up. At that point, he ends up getting called to go into the warehouse because somebody's attacking, and he's heading that way. And that's it. So good. So good. This was easily the biggest nugget so far. Seeing the slow decline into madness that Paul had was super good. And again, it plays into my knowledge of what happens going forward. I know about the argument between Paul and Rudeus. I know about that struggle between the two of them. But again, I only seen Rudeus' side. When I watch that anime, I only see Rudeus' side. I see a small little screenshot gallery, like stills and stuff, but I never get to see, I didn't hear the downfall of Paul. I didn't hear, I didn't see, I didn't witness what he was really going through, everything that ran through his mind. And yes, I think it really is so funny, like a passing comment about him getting stuck on this teleportation trap thing is a good thing. Like I like that addition that he knows about something that causes disaster. So it kind of shows, okay, I've had experience with teleportation traps. Teleportation traps are dangerous. And so thus he can say that he's had an experience with something and he's equating it to it. It's not that he's, okay, this flash happened and it's an unknown, I don't know what happened. He's able to put his own experiences into play into his own insecurities. So I really love that that was an addition to his story. It gives weight to his feelings. It gives weight to his fears. But additionally, hearing about him pretty much saving so many people and at the same time regretting what he did, that's where it really hits heavy for me. Like, this is a father who lost his whole family, and at this point he believes he lost his whole family, and yet he's saving all these other people, and people hate him, and people are getting angry at him. It's the selfless warrior. It's the selfless hero that never intended to be that. Initially, his plan was to save his family. That was his primary goal, but he created this system in order to find them. And in the end, all it did was save other people and not himself. And so yes, I can tell now going into the next chapter when we start to get into Rudeus and Paul talking face to face, I'm going to understand Paul now. I'm going to understand why he's so angry. And again, technically with the anime, we went to the point where Rudeus and Paul were reintroduced, and then we immediately went to the meeting between the two of them. We seen Paul's outburst, Rudeus leaves, and then we get Paul's story. Now this time, I'm going to have both of their stories before I go into that conversation, and I'm really curious how that's going to feel when I start reading that. I've kind of skimmed a little bit, but I'm going to be very curious to see how that plays out as I read through that argument, because now, again, I have the weight of both of their experiences to really... I think I'm going to make an entire... I'm going to have to do an entire video on just Chapter 5, or Chapter 4, I think, but we'll see how it kind of plays out and where it ends, but it's super good. This chapter 2 was so super good. It reminds me a lot of volume 1. When I read through volume 1, I got so much perspective of Paul and Zenith that I never got. And not only just them, what they're dealing with currently, but also their feelings of their family and their children. Getting knowledge that there's something that he believes is wrong with Norn is really interesting. Now, I don't know if something's actually wrong with Norn. I don't know. They technically had a lot of issues during the birth, but I don't know that there's anything necessarily wrong with Norn. But it does technically put some... Yes, it makes Aisha out to be a genius, which again, season 1 spoilers, we do get a little sense of that with Aisha. But Norn has always kind of been like just a normal child. And so, yes, I can see that Paul has some sort of fears as to the future of Norn. What will she end up being? She's not a brilliant person like Rudeus or Aisha. Or again, will it turn into a thing where Norn ends up surprising us all and she ends up being the smartest out of all of them in the end? It just kind of, again... It gives me a lot of character to both Aisha and Norn. And again, to Lilia, Zenith, Paul, stuff that we don't get in the anime. The anime has been mostly adapted so far as strictly the perspective of Rudy. And though we get that brief moment where we see, yes, Paul travel to Buena Village and then travel to Millis Continent, you don't hear what he's going through. You don't sense what he's going through. You just know that something happened. This dude's looking really rough. Like, he spent a lot of time looking for people. That's all you know. You don't get a sense of, again, that slow downward spiral. And again, his own experiences with teleportation traps and how he feels his family's lost. And again, his frustration over saving everybody but his own family. So good. So good. So good. Oh, I can't wait for more. But anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, this continued trek through Mushoku Tensei. I definitely appreciate, as always, the support of everybody through this entire journey through the novels. Again, no spoilers in the comment section. I would greatly appreciate it if you'd keep those to yourself until we get to the points of that stuff. As always, make sure to go down there and hit that like button, share the video, leave a comment. All that stuff helps out the algorithms, get the video out there for more people. I definitely appreciate the support there. If you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you get all my content. I do news, reviews, first impressions, top lists. If it's anime, it's pretty much here, as well as a full trek through the novel series and my thoughts on each and every chapter. Additionally, if you like this content and you're able to, I would greatly appreciate if you consider supporting us on Patreon. Our tips link or super thanks button down below. I greatly appreciate everybody that supports the channel, and y'all take care.